since you guys are really wanting to know. What happens is, Michael does in fact sneak out, go into town, and he drinks from the white water fountain. Nobody catches him. Well, no, excuse me. A woman walking by sees him, scares him off, and he runs away. But he realizes that the white water wasn't any different than the black water was. It's just a nicer water fountain. And he starts to think, well, if that was something they told me I wasn't allowed to have and it wasn't any different, if that's something they kind of fibbed about or didn't tell the entire truth about, that it was so important and it was so different that I had to drink from another water fountain, what are the other things they've been telling me that weren't true? And he starts thinking, well, then I could become a doctor if I wanted to be. I could become a writer if I wanted to be. I could go to college. I could go to school. I can be smart and take care of my family and all these things. And you see him thinking of these things. You see a young boy thinking, and in the back of his mind, the picture is of all these dreams he has. And that's the end of the story. He realizes that, like, Lee actually guessed it almost completely, you know, right there. I mean, you guessed it. He's a person like everybody else. The white water wasn't any different than what he was drinking before. It didn't taste better. It was just in a fancier fountain.
My thinking was too concrete with that. I'm trying to think of like
No, but you were good.
Yeah.
That was good.
I didn't even think about
You
that.
thought about like him as an
Yeah.
individual. You thought about like the in-between space. But okay, now that we've thought about that and we realize, you know, what people were thinking about, which, you know, everybody's different, so thoughts were different. I want you to flip that over and look at the timeline I said about earlier. And I want you to make sure you put your name and your date on it, which it is October 17th. And it has a timeline title. I want you to put, beside timeline title, storyboard activity. And if you will look up at the screen, the PowerPoint, it is the outline for the assignment I'm giving you now. Your assignment, in the same pairs you worked with for your timeline, that we got together in small groups and talked about, I want you to go to a computer or, you know, a tablet or something that you have internet access to, and research stories of everyday people who fought for and lived during the Civil Rights Movement in the United States. Like Michael, everyday people. I mean, you can look up people like Martin Luther King Jr., you know, these really iconic figures in American history, but I kind of want you to just look for, you know, people that you've never heard of, that you know, weren't really aware of. Maybe you only heard their name and you didn't know a whole lot about. And I want you, with your group, to use your findings or your research to start brainstorming ideas for a storyboard, which will show and tell the story of the person that you chose, what their story is through the Civil Rights Movement, what their connection to the Civil Rights Movement is. I want you to do that for the remainder of the class. The timeline's there for you to use to kind of jot down notes and important details of the stories that you find. You also have the timeline I gave you with the general American history timeline for the Civil Rights Movement. And then, I mean, that's what you're going to be doing right now for the activity, but for tonight then, if you want to write this down, that'd be a good idea. Tonight for homework, I want you to continue your research. So right now, in groups, in your small pairs, I want you to research a person or a group of people or a family or friends that were, you know, quote-unquote everyday people, and, you know, find out what their story was through the Civil Rights Movement. And then tonight, on your own, independently, I want you to continue